Dear viewers, welcome to the Ukrainian podcast number one channel. Here we are talking about latest political trends and geopolitical situation overall. With me, Victoria Zakrevskaya, founder of Boldozer Consulting agency, and we are today talking about the polarization of the global geopolitical scene of today's world. So my first question is, what do you think about today's polarization? Who will take the leadership after all the situation happened through last days?
Well, I think in general we are witnessing today a situation when the post-Second World War order has been contested, and the biggest and clearest rupture of this order happened after the full-scale invasion of Russia in Ukraine. And this fragmentation will increasingly mean that the world order does not look anymore like it used to be in terms of having the West and the rest. Now we will see more and more regional and situational alliances that will need to create their own rules and that will seek to convert their economic power, first of all, into greater political and military influence as a result of increase of influence. And in these terms, of course, China is the main competitor of the West, and it seeks converting its economic position, its economy. It's sort of discussional, but it is increasingly economy number one in the world. But it hasn't been a great political power. So what is happening now is that they are creating an alternative club of countries that will be able, or at least this is the aim, to be able to create parallel or alternative structures economically, politically, and militarily. And I think this parade that we've seen, it is pretty disturbing, in my opinion, because of the scale of the military power and the weapons, the amount, and the types of weapons that they've been showcasing. It sends a very clear message to the West. And since it's to the scale, it's the first parade like this, and basically this alternative club of powers looks also pretty scary, because the countries that are there is China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and some of the former Russian or Soviet clientele in the Middle East, in Africa, and all of these powers are autocracies, by the way. And if we look back into history after 50s, 60s, we will see that there was a period when there was sort of a hope, or at least a strategy, a global strategy, first of all, advanced by the US, and democratization of these regions. There was still hope that these countries will not slip entirely, at least, into autocracy, but almost 70 years later, we see that unfortunately it did happen. And I think the biggest disappointment in this regard is, of course, the slip of Russia itself into autocracy, because the power of Yeltsin was was vested with a lot of hope that democracy and privatization, establishment of division of power, establishment and entrance of free media, into the country will make sure that autocracy will not be able to come back. Basically, in the biggest country of Eurasia, that is between China and the US. But since the democratic project has completely failed in Russia, as we see now we will see this process of polarization and fragmentation, perhaps even to a greater extent than we saw during the Cold War. And that's basically the main pretext of world politics today.
So, talking about this anti-Western club, can we call it China and puppets, or somebody else also has influence there?
Well, of course, it's China is the main partner. Russia is a secondary partner. India is not. I mean, all of it as of now is a situational alliance. It's not a very well integrated or institutionalized or even aligned in terms of alignment of interest bloc. Because it is not a bloc. It is an attempt to see what are common interests of these countries, what are resources they could exchange or put together. And next steps would be to create institutions on top of that. But if we talk about countries that are potentially interested in this project, it's of course China is the main partner, Russia is a secondary partner, India is a tertiary partner, because their main problem politically is that even though economically they would be very much interested to integrate, but they have their own security issues with Pakistan, and there's also an issue of terrorism, and China is on the side where they finance all those threats that India is very concerned with. And should a larger regional conflict in this part of the world or a global conflict take place, India, of course, will rely on military and economic support of their traditional partners, meaning the US and UK. And this does prevent them from, even strategically thinking about being a partner in the bloc. So they will probably take part in it, should it take place, but in some other form than, equal member, if we're talking about something that will be created in the form of membership. Then, of course, we have friends of Russia, Iran, and North Korea, as, basically, first of all, pariahs of the economic world who would definitely benefit from entering some sort of alternative economic and financial system where the issue of payments and perhaps logistical issues could be levied to a higher extent than they were previously, because these two countries, as we know, are under sanctions for many, many years. And these sanctions were easier to enforce when global system was more united, and risk was treated as a country risk. So when international institutions worked well, it was easier to say, okay, now we put restrictions on trade with Iran, and compliance would makes it a job. And actually, by the way, the issue of all this shadow fleets, they have started to exist with the sanctions on Iran and North Korea, because they still needed to trade surpassing this international restrictions that were put on them. But the scale of it was so much smaller than today in case of Russia, that they were able to use all those loopholes in maritime law, in maritime administration. There's also a certain degree of flexibility in managing the flag, as we know, and all this served global economy back then to facilitate trade, not with these two countries who are sanctioned, but to facilitate trade, to give it a bit more flexibility, to make sure that ships with one commodity that is put on the ship in one place of the world reaches its destination in another part of the world easier, faster, safer, and that would in the end serve the ideas of cost and efficiency. But what we're seeing now is that cost and efficiency and economy are going on a second, like on a background, and politics comes on the foreground. So coming back to the question, who are the countries? So it's Iran, North Korea, but of course it's countries of Central Asia, who are geographically situated in a place where their immediate economic and political security interests lay in this area. Of course, it's countries like Belarus, who and a larger post-Soviet area, because they could benefit from taking part in this coalition. Of course, some other, as I said, autocracies from the Middle East, and some of the former clients of Soviet Union in Africa as well. Africa right now starts, Africa and South America, they start playing a little bit bigger role in the world order, and Africa in particular, due to the fact that a lot of critical minerals are situated in Africa. And they're, again, since they have more economic relevance to the world, they will also seek to turn economic benefits into political influence. And all this actually creates a pretty large base for creating organization that will have economic and political interest. But as of now, it is a situational alliance. It is more an attempt, a project, and we will see what will happen with it. In any case, I think it's fair to talk about an example of Eurasian Economic Union that Russia tried to establish in the post-Soviet area. And unlike this process with China and India and other countries, it already exists in institutional form. It's enforceable. There's economic part of it. There's a security part of it in the form of our the KB, how you call it in English, the security organization of the Eurasian Union. And all this is created already in the form of membership. So it is binding, and we can see that this project is problematic in terms of enforceability, because first of all, of the unequal distribution, first of all, of economic gain, which is always in favor of the biggest partner, who is Russia. And that's why countries like Kazakhstan, Belarus, and other, they do participate in it, but it is an equal relationship that is not, strictly speaking, very beneficial to them in economic terms. And second, in terms of military security guarantees, we already saw that these guarantees did not prevent Armenia from having a conflict with Azerbaijan. So all this, what we're discussing now in relation to China and its possible, union with Russia, India, and other countries, it is a project right now. And given the example of Eurasian Economic Union, I think this project is very problematic in terms of being effective, because we talk about autocracies that have pretty strong nationalistic ideas of how resources should be distributed. But most of all, these countries will keep getting more and more militarized. That means that also any sort of, security guarantees will be very problematic to enforce. And lastly, as I said, given that India, their third sort of biggest partner is a strategic partner of two largest Western military powers, US and UK. I think this project, as of today, has more reputational meaning and more a mean of sending certain very clear messages to the West, rather than a blueprint of a future effective organization that could, take place very soon. But we will see. This is only what we see now.
But still, talking about India, they are closing their ties with China now. So, is it a threat to British-Indian partnership, US-Indian partnership? What will be the result of this situative alliance, as you mentioned, between China and India? Because last actions in Beijing, in summit of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, they shown that India and China are really, really getting closer to each other.
Yes, it's true. But as I said, cooperation of India and China lay almost entirely in economic sphere, and this is dictated first of all by the pace of development of their economies. It's right now. It's just soars the economic growth, and for the country like India, that is a huge country, and there is a huge need in infrastructural projects. There's a growing need for resources, and most of all for electricity, because any infrastructural project means a lot of electricity generation. And that makes them obvious partners in the region. So I don't think that in strategic terms, this cooperation of India with China is seen from its strategic partners as problematic. It's pretty obvious. It's actually in the interest of everyone that India would also gradually become a larger economic power that would in turn also turn it into a larger political power in the future. So this point, again, given that it's a situational project and strategically it's in the interest of everyone that India would get a cheaper resources, but most of all enough of procurement, that there would be enough of resources, is in the interest of everyone, and military cooperation of India in this project is against its interests. So I don't think there's much of concern in this regard. So I think it's pretty clean for India to take part in it in its form as it is right now. Actually, for everyone who takes part in it, it's more like why don't we see what we can do, unless we can't. It's also not without concern for China how the West is going to respond in general to the situation that's unfolding right now. Also in terms of peace talks with regard to Ukraine. And some of the other processes that take part in China Sea, that take part in Israel, in Iran. So all this, we again talk about the four localities of possible conflict that are now geopolitically playing the biggest role, which is Russia, Ukraine, Iran, Israel, North Korea, and South Korea, and Arctic. So that's basically four places where a conflict could mean the biggest influence, and this particular economic project is just one of the things that are happening, and it's not strictly speaking a security threat to anyone. It's something to follow and to see how things are going to unfold.
Let's discuss about Russia's role in this project. is it completely dependent on Chinese influence? So, as the parrot shown, I've seen these great pictures when Xi Jinping is just taking Putin with his hand and grabbing him like a puppet. Is that a real situation now, or Russia has more influence than we know?
Well, I think first of all, Putin has a size that makes it pretty easy for many leaders, especially in this summit, to appear bigger than him. But I think that clearly Russia plays a secondary role, and it's dictated again by its size of its economy, size of its army, size of its nuclear arsenal, and that obviously makes them a secondary and dependent partner. And by the way, again, even in this economic cooperation, for Russia, in case of Eurasian Union, for its smaller partners, it is only beneficial to take part in it until certain extent, because if integration would be to take place on a much deeper, higher level, they would immediately start having more liabilities than benefits, and that applies to any union, economic, political, or military. So, of course, getting into this process of integration, I think Russia obviously will have a much more subservient place than it ever had in prospects with the EU and the West, also given the nature of political nature of these two alliances. While in the West, everything was created and integrated with a spirit of equality and interest and openness. I think integrating with a partner like China is not going to feel nice, and it obviously already doesn't feel very nice. All those resources that are traded to China instead of the West. There's a very little space to negotiate the pricing or the volume. All of it is pretty straightforward and much more provides for subservient type of relations, and for sure less equal and less beneficial in all terms. But it is the best alternative Russia has today due to sanctions and isolation. So that's why they're going for it.
How should the West react on everything we discussed before? So, on this parade, this closing ties between Russia, China, India, and this formation of new anti-Western coalition?
Well, I think there should be something like a dual track strategy, which is already in place. First of all, in Europe, so it should be the credible defense lineup for Europe, because that's like a shoring of the West that ends with Ukraine, and it should be accompanied by diplomatic engagement with the so-called global South. So these are developing countries on all continents that are going to compete for resources and development funds between these two emerging economic blocs. And if we look at Africa, for example, again, due to its relevance with regard to metals and other rare resources that are now extremely important for technology and energy transition, because they are situated in Africa, we can see that the West is increasingly creating infrastructure to contest the investments and infrastructural projects that were made by China in years in this regard. And this is going to be more and more true also for South American countries, for countries of Central Asia, where also a lot of resources lay. And for example, but this also means that some of the topics that were relevant in political terms for these countries, like, for example, rule of law, democracy, they will go in the background. They're not going to rule the discussion, because it is more about creating, again, situational alliances that are not strategic, that are beneficial perhaps in a shorter term, and wouldn't lead to any sort of deep cooperation, but that need to be in place to contest the hegemony of the first and the largest economy of the world, which is China. Of course, sanctions and restrictions need to be in place, and they must become more enforceable, because sanctions is a very loose thing. Restrictions has been in place, as I said, since Iran, since North Korea, but the unpleasant truth about sanctions is that no matter what restrictions any government or group of governments in the world puts on another one, there is a question of resources and trade that contest this legal regime, because trade will never stop. And there is no lack of resources. The question is how they move from one place in the world to another. And the set of rules that exist today, especially in maritime law, and that's why the shadow fleet is a growing concern for Western countries and their alliances, is because this trade that always finds a way to surpass or reroute or rearrange things, it keeps trading. Trade keeps going, and it contests the legal regime. And in the end, trade that keeps flowing, it's in the interest of everyone. So
Let's talk a bit on this issue, about trade and sanctions. So, Trump imposed the first part of secondary tariffs on India to stop Russian wars through pushing Russia's biggest partners to press on Putin for stopping this war because of economic influence on US India and US China trade on the situation. So, do you think he will continue the strategy with tariffs? Will he grow the India tariffs and impose new tariffs on China?
Yes, I think this is what's going to happen, especially now after we saw this show. That is increasingly sending a very serious, threatening message to the West and US in particular. And I think it happened not without thinking about the next round of negotiations. So sanctions, more enhanced sanctions to all countries that still have freedom outside more institutionalized blocks to trade, they will increase. And US, of course, the US is using here their power as the financial absolute first power in the world. And most likely we will see some sort of restrictions that are put, maybe not on major things in trade between the US, India, and China, but there will be more restrictions, because as you and I and everyone who follows Ukraine more closely will understand that Putin is not interested in having peace agreement with Ukraine. So it is at the moment very unlikely. And Trump, of course, he will need to react to the whole security situation in the East, and that means more economic restrictions to recipients of Russian resources. So it's not against, strictly speaking, those countries. It's about putting more restrictions on resources with certain origin. This will happen, so we will probably see also a new set of sanctions from the European Union that will perhaps remind a bit more sanction regimes against Iran and North Korea. But what exactly it will be, it's really hard to say right now. For sure, I can say that more restrictions with regard to shadow fleet. This is what's discussed today in Europe and in the UK. The Royal Institute of Security has issued a white paper on shadow fleet just a few days before. So they're actively discussing and advocating for very concrete things that could be done. But these are not just sanctions, because in terms of sanctions, they already exist. It's hard to enforce them. So there are some things that could be done on, again, multilateral level in maritime law, within international organizations that rule international waters. And these changes we will probably see happen in this fall and in the next 6 to 9 months. But perhaps also, yes, a certain more like symbolic list of sanctions will be taken against some of the ships, some of the ship owners, and perhaps some of the countries as well, who are still involved in trade of energy resources in Europe, surpassing Ukraine.
Let's talk a bit more on this issue. So, what do you expect from EU's 19th sanction package? You already mentioned the strengthening sanctions on shadow fleet, but what else do you expect? Will they impose secondary sanctions on China, India, or other Russia's partners, or they will just focus on the direct sanctions on Russia?
I think the focus is in this regard is not going to change. It will be direct sanctions against Russia. The reason for it is obvious. The EU is economic partner of both China and India, and they're now in a very difficult situation already, given the tariffs from the Trump side. So they now must find better opportunities for trade that are alternative to American market. So I think we're not going to see anything direct against either China or India. But again, and probably nothing that would directly restrict those countries in terms of international waters. But there will be certain decisions that could become more restricting within other organizations, as I said, that are more technical. And this package will be it will reflect, I think, security situation in Ukraine more or less. But we'll see. Actually,
You said that EU is a big partner, trade partner to China and India, but EU is still, unfortunately, a big trade partner for Russia. They're still buying Russian oil and gas. So, in your opinion, what needs to happen for EU countries, EU members to stop buying Russian fuels?
Well, first of all, most direct imports have already been slashed. But of course, there are certain strategic expectations from certain countries like Hungary and Romania, first of all. And there's still a way to go. First of all, because again, there are countries who are infrastructurally dependent on energy resources, not just oil and gas, but electricity generation is a very big issue in Europe, not just in Hungary or Romania. First of all, it is connected to the fact that we are now experiencing global warming, and summers have become much longer and much warmer, and that creates a heightened demand for air conditioning. And now we're talking not just about houses where we could use air conditioning, but we're talking about the industrial scale, where the demand for electricity goes higher even in economically developed countries that are large economies in Europe. And that means that until fossil fuels are replaced with more ecological ways of producing electricity and energy, Europe will need fossil fuels, and of course they come from Russia. So coming back to what they could do, they could diversify their energy resources. They could do infrastructural upgrades, and there's a need for larger public support for this transition. But speaking today from Europe, I can tell you that it's hard to really feel how important this topic is and how much effort is really done in Europe to switch from fossil fuels to alternative energy resources. Another problem here is that to fully make this transition, Europe and the world will fall into other resource trap, which is critical minerals that are mostly in China and in Africa and managed by China, because they've been developing this extraction and investments in this field and investments in the logistics for a decade, while the West was not doing that. And the US and allies are only catching up now with this issue. But for sure, this diversification is happening, and there are certain problems with political unity in this regard, because again, as we're talking these days, the situational alliances and national interests become more important than committing to this long-term ideas and goals, which is why countries like Hungary, like Turkey, like Romania, like Serbia prevent European Union from taking unified decisions with this regard. But this is a trend and a strategy that is in place and that is moving forward. And even with the powers that Hungary has today inside the European Union, and I think they're presidents of the European Council, where they push for this energy agenda actively, and where they defend their nuclear power generation capacities in cooperation with Russia, as we know, with Rosatom and other companies. All this, even though it means that Russian resources are not completely out of the European Union, this is a question of time. in the.
Let's talk a bit more about oil directly. Oil market is really dependent on what is happening in global geopolitical scene. We've seen how the prices of oil skyrocketed when the full-scale invasion of Russia to Ukraine started. So I want to ask you about one more another conflict in the Middle East, Iran, Israel, USA. How did this conflict influence the oil prices, and how did Russian economy succeeded on that or not?
Well, in general, trade in oil has been disrupted by the war in the Middle East, and not just in terms of pricing, but most of all in terms of in terms of logistics and security of this biggest logistical routes. And this is a question that's going to persist, that's going to keep prices higher than lower. It's hard to say how exactly, but given the fact that this commodity cannot be moved effectively in terms of cost, means that the price is going to be higher. For Russia, as we discussed earlier, given that its main markets are closed due to Western sanctions, they of course have much less margin in trade, and now since they are moving also politically in sort of unification with their new main economic partners, and they have no alternative to sort of have a better position in negotiating the price or conditions. Of course, it's hard to call this trade very beneficial to Russia. One of their main goals in peace talks with the West is, of course, lifting at least certain restrictions so that their trade in energy resources could resume with the Europe, and at least some payments could be reinstalled. So this is it's hard to see this question as either win or lose for Russia. It is certainly a big lose for Russia, but given energy interdependencies, first of all, of Europe, it costs us all to have this situation. But for the sake of safer Europe and safer world, of course, more restrictions on Russian originated resources will be put in place in one way or another, and that means their margin will become even smaller. So that's more or less general.
I'll I'll combine two questions here. The first one is how the situation in the Middle East influences on Ukrainian war, and the second question is how important is Ukrainian war for PRC, for the United States, and for other global players. So, are we still on the first pages of the newspapers, or we are not anymore?
Well, for sure, Ukraine is still a priority for the US and European Union. More so since I think not just politicians, but societies realize more and more that security situation in the world is decreasing. And Ukraine is seen here as the front of the threat that comes from this part of the world. And of course, public discussion is more and more complicated with time. It's pretty natural feature of people's thinking. We adapt to everything we experience, and that of course happened to European societies. There's also a certain friction in political terms in Europe and in the US. It's harder to argue why help should persist or increase, also because the conflict in the Middle East showed that it's not the only problematic location where security situation could disrupt economy and security situation. So for sure, public spotlight and political spotlight for any topic is a market. So Middle Eastern conflict for sure has taken part of the spotlight away from Ukraine, and for China, Ukraine is absolutely secondary. For them, now the war, so they have more like their front line of conflict lays in economic terms with the US now with tariffs, but politically Ukraine for them actually is an opportunity, to use it as pretext for greater political projects that they could lead together with Russia. Actually, they use Russia here because Russia has no other choice right now, and they're able to create these greater structures and potentially also turn this economic power that they have into greater political influence. So they put together their economic power and their military power, and increasingly creating a rival for the US and the West. And for them, of course, frozen conflict scenario would be the best to weaken the West without direct military conflict, but we will see how it goes.
Let's talk a bit more about the frozen conflict and at all about the end of Ukrainian war. What do you think about the diplomatic track? Do you expect the meeting of Putin, Zelensky, and Trump, or just Zelensky and Putin? And if not, what will be Trump's and EU's reaction if Putin is continuing to sabotage the diplomatic process?
I think at the moment there are no signs of meaningful talks yet, even on a lower level than meeting of leaders. And time passes, and I think the US realizes that Putin is a liar. And if we look at the military side of the events, of course, we see that Russia escalates militarily and uses diplomacy to stall talks. So the strategy is very simple: to use diplomacy to stall to talks and win time and increase military deterrence, and to use military deterrence to stall diplomacy. So it's it's as easy as this, and I think the three-way summit is unlikely unless Trump convinces its partners to go for a much more radical set of sanctions or also tariffs on some of their partners that normally wouldn't be seen as someone who engages in threatening behavior, like India, for example. Like in the logic that we're all used to, in economic, political, more normalized logic, their talks with China present no threat because it's their economic interest, and the US by no means is going to compensate for the losses of not doing so. But if Trump would decide that actually now another rules apply, it could be a very different situation. So it's hard to predict exactly what could happen, but for sure, I think the three-way meeting is very far from sight at the moment.
One more question on a diplomatic roundtable is security guarantees for Ukraine. What do you think? Which are the best options for Ukraine to get security guarantees? Who will provide us with them? And which components are included in the best package that we could receive?
Well, I think it could include bilateral guarantees on the side of US and UK. and some sort of agreement with NATO that would offer a rapid response mechanisms of the style that NATO has inside. But I think integration with EU defense structures and military aid programs will probably have to go outside official NATO membership. However, a clear pathway to NATO or any other form of military integration obviously will have to be part of the political package of any agreement that should be in place. I think that's as much as we can expect at this point of time. But again, now commenting even such large strategic things in geopolitics is pretty hard, because the level of uncertainty in how hard the response of the US could be today is hard to say. And the harder it can get, the more probably possibilities we may have in this, Ukraine may have in this conversation. But that will also come at a price of, a larger deterrence in other areas of the world. So it's hard to say, should a larger conflict take place in China Sea, how much effort would Western countries put into securing even larger security guarantees within NATO, for example. So it's hard to say, but for sure some sort of bilateral track with the main Western partners, some sort of a NATO-related track, because Ukraine is a forefront of NATO, geographically NATO security itself. So there should be some sort of rapid response. And of course, a political part of this guarantees should, at least theoretically, keep Ukraine in the area of influence of Europe, and that means NATO as well. So we'll see.
To finalize our discussion, I want to ask you, what role do you expect in global geopolitics for post-war Ukraine, so after the war ends?
I think it goes along the lines that we discussed. For sure, Ukraine will be Europe's military backbone, and the fact that the Ukrainian army now is, first of all, the largest and the most trained army in Europe will make it naturally a security provider on the eastern flank, which is a very serious seat at the table of European politics. And on top of the army, we have also established already, and this is going to be intensified in any case, a large defense sector. Europe also goes through militarization process increasingly. They will produce more arms, more production. The larger part of economy will become military, and this will mean also larger economic integration in this particular sector with Ukraine, given its experience. And that will also become possible for Ukraine to become a very important regional anchor for NATO, not just in terms of its army, but also in terms of being part of their military production infrastructure. And of course, politically, Ukraine will keep being and perhaps maybe even becoming more important as the sign of resilience and democracy and resistance. I think the topic of resistance is going to become more and more important in European politics. And Europeans have not realized yet, and for sure are not ready for mobilization, but that's what also will have to happen in the coming years. And Ukraine, since the experience of what the country and its people has gone through will inevitably be a very important sign and a very important partner in this process of turning the societies from laissez-faire, from the social security heaven that European Union was dreaming about, into a more pragmatic, more militarily capable bloc of countries. And Ukraine, for sure, also given the amount of economic help that it already received and will keep receiving after, the future of Ukraine is for sure in Europe.
I hope your last prediction comes to the reality very soon. Thank you for joining. I remind our viewers that Victoria Zakrevskaya, founder of Boldozer Consulting Group, was here with us, speaking to us today. Thank you for joining. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next series.
Thank you. Спасибо. Дякую.